My grandmother's front step had a blue cloud of catmint for 30 straight Mays. She never once cared for it. Once a year, late May, right before Memorial Day, she'd pull a pair of old shears from her apron pocket, cut it back by a third, and put the shears away. 3 minutes of work. That was the whole agreement. Most perennial videos shout at you. Stop doing this. Stop wasting money. This one is going to walk slowly with you instead. Through 15 quiet companions that bloom from Memorial Day all the way to first frost and ask almost nothing in return. By the end, I want to tell you what my grandmother's actual agreement with that catmint was. The one that gave her 30 straight Mays of blue cloud for 3 minutes of work a year. But first, the plants themselves. Pour the tea before we start. 15 plants, about 13 minutes. 3 handfuls of 5, like sorting old letters into piles. We'll walk through them in the order I'd plant them in my own yard, from the most familiar to the most quietly beautiful. The first 5, the quiet bloomers. The ones already standing somewhere in your yard, even if you didn't plant them. Catmint, Echinacea, black-eyed Susan, hardy geranium Rozanne, and Penstemon. The middle 5, the lesser-known companions. The ones most gardeners walk right past and shouldn't. Salvia, Heuchera, Agastache, Scabiosa, and Amsonia. And the last 5, the legacy plants. The ones that get more beautiful for decades if you leave them where you planted them. Baptisia, Clematis, Crocosmia, Chelone, and veronicastrum. Let's walk. Before we begin, every plant in this video tells you its USDA zones on the screen. So whether you're gardening in Zone 3 Vermont or Zone 10 Florida, you'll know which of the 15 is yours. And whenever a plant has a quiet warning, for pets, for invasive habits, you'll see that on the screen too. No surprises. Number 1. Catmint, Nepeta faassenii. The plant that taught my grandmother that 3 minutes a year is enough. A soft lavender blue cloud that begins in late May and doesn't stop until October. The Chelsea chop in early June, that single cutback, is what gives it the long second flush. In the south, treat the midsummer fade as a quiet rest, not a problem. Water deeply once and walk away. The autumn flush comes. Number 2. Echinacea, the painter's canvas coneflower. The plant most likely to already be standing somewhere in your yard. A rainbow of genetics that began transforming gardens over 2 decades ago, starting with Art's Pride in 2004. Salmon, deep red, golden yellow, colours that didn't used to belong to coneflowers. But the most important thing about Echinacea isn't the spring colour, it's the winter. Leave the cones standing. Goldfinches return to those cones every January, when almost nothing else is left for them to eat. Number 3. Black-eyed Susan, Rudbeckia fulgida. The plant the monarchs stop at on their way to Mexico. It blooms from July straight through first frost, asks almost nothing of you, and leaves a winter gift most gardeners miss, that dry rattle of stiff stems brushing each other in a November wind. Northern gardeners, this is your peak performer. Mount Cuba Center's trial data backs that up. Number 4. Hardy geranium. The variety to look for is Rozanne, a patient blue mound that doesn't try to be the star. It fills the gaps nothing else does. The stems thread themselves through your other plants without needing a stake, without needing your attention. Pacific Northwest gardeners, This one was made for your climate. The cool, long season is exactly what it wants. Number 5. Penstemon. The hummingbird's quiet appointment from Memorial Day on. Those tubular bells were shaped over millions of years for one visitor, the ruby-throated hummingbird. One small request from Penstemon: do not give it your old stems for winter mulch. Leave them standing. They are the winter blanket. If those first 5 felt familiar, these next 5 are the ones you'll wonder why no one told you about. The plants most gardeners walk right past. Number 6. Salvia nemorosa, the deep violet that holds its color through the hottest July. Look closely at the flower stem and you'll see something almost no one points out. The blooms are arranged in stacked rings around the stalk. Botanists call that a verticillaster. Cut the first flush back when it fades, and a second flush comes within 3 weeks. Bumblebees keep coming back the whole season. Number 7. Heuchera, coral bells. The plant that earns its place even on the days it isn't blooming. The flowers float on thin scapes above the leaves like small bells suspended mid-air. The real performance, though, is the foliage. Burgundy, lime, silver-veined. 3 seasons of color even when nothing is blooming. Pacific Northwest gardeners, this is another of your champions. Number 8. Agastache, the late-season gift you didn't know to ask for. Bruise a leaf between your fingers and the air around you turns to licorice. That's not perfume, that's the plant defending itself, and bees finding their way home. If a name in this video has reminded you of someone you'd like to garden alongside, your sister, a neighbor, a friend who just bought their first house, you can share this with them. That's the only ask I'll make in this video. No subscribe, just a quiet share, if it feels right. Number 9. Scabiosa, the pincushion flower, soft on top, surprisingly tough underneath. Run a fingertip across the bloom and you feel the whole story of this plant. Soft outer petals and a center like the head of a pin. Butterflies don't seem to mind. They visit, and they keep visiting, from June into October. Number 10. Amsonia hubrichtii, the plant that performs twice in the same growing year. Soft blue stars in spring, then in October the whole plant turns to billowing gold, willow-fine foliage moving in the wind. But the part most gardeners don't know about Amsonia is what happens after autumn. Leave the stalks standing through winter. 12 to 18 inches of those hollow stems is documented as nesting habitat for native solitary bees, small mason bees, leafcutter bees, the ones quietly doing 75% of the pollination of your fruit trees next spring. These last 5 are the legacy plants, the ones that get more beautiful for decades if you leave them where you planted them. Number 11. Baptisia australis, false indigo, the plant you don't move. Ever. Spring brings tall spikes of indigo flowers. Summer brings deep blue-green foliage that looks like a small shrub. But here's the patient part. Baptisia takes 3 years to look like anything at all. Year 4, it becomes the most architectural plant in your border. Year 10, it's a statue. Walk past it in January and the dry black seed pods rattle like tiny gourds. Number 12. Clematis durandii, the climbing companion for any vertical thing in your yard, an obelisk, a fence post, an old rose. A single bloom on this clematis is documented to last 17 days. When the flowers finish, they don't simply disappear. They become silver puffballs, seed heads that catch the slant of November light. The plant gives you 2 seasons in one. Number 13. Crocosmia Lucifer. The small flame in the August border. Arching scapes that nod like small lanterns. Hummingbirds find them within a day of opening. One honest note for gardeners in zones 8 and 9, Crocosmia spreads enthusiastically by both seed and corm in mild climates. Deadhead before seed sets, and lift and divide every 3 years. In colder zones, it stays where you put it. Number 14. Chelone glabra. Turtle head. For the wet corner, nothing else seems to like. Watch what a bumblebee does at a turtle head flower for 30 seconds and you'll understand the name. The bee climbs entirely inside the hooded bloom, disappears for a few moments, and comes back out powdered in pollen. That damp spot in your yard? This is its plant. Number 15. Veronicastrum virginicum, culver's root. The tall white candelabra that closes the season. The flower spike opens from the bottom up, a slow gradient of bloom that takes weeks to climb the candelabra. Native bumblebees organize their late summer rounds around it. It is also the only known host plant for one small, quiet creature, the culver's root borer moth. Mount Cuba Center lists this plant as a keystone species in the mid-Atlantic landscape. That's not a marketing word. It means take it out of the landscape and the landscape changes. So, 15 plants, 5 quiet bloomers most gardeners already know. Catmint, Echinacea, Black-Eyed Susan, Rozanne, Penstemon. 5 lesser-known companions that change a garden the most. Salvia, Heuchera, Agastache, Scabiosa, Amsonia. And 5 legacy plants that will outlive your gardening career. Baptisia, Clematis, Crocosmia, Chelone, Veronicastrum. And about my grandmother's agreement with that catmint. 3 minutes with the shears once a year in late May. That was the whole agreement. 30 straight Mays of blue cloud for 3 minutes of work. The Royal Horticultural Society calls it the Chelsea Chop. My grandmother just called it Saturday. If even one of these 15 is already standing somewhere in your yard right now, maybe an echinacea you forgot you planted, its cones still holding seeds for the goldfinches that haven't shown up yet. Leave a small flower emoji in the comments. That's all. No subscribe, no share. Just gardener to gardener, a quiet acknowledgement that you're out there. Happy gardening and happy resting.